Welcome back. In our last lecture, we covered the scientific method and its importance in shaping good, solid research. But let me ask you a new question now. How do we know if something is true? The ultimate intent behind that question is really the aim of good science. And broadly speaking, the scientific method can be divided into two styles of scientific inquiry to help us know what's true. One of these methods is called historical science, and it's used to examine existing evidence and past occurrences to draw deductions. The problem with historical science is that conclusions are closely tied to the perspectives of the observer, and it can lead to erroneous conclusions if it's unchecked by other methods of inquiry. The other style is called experimental science, and it relies fairly heavily on the concept of empiricism. It says that in order for something to be considered scientifically true and valid, we need to be able to use observable, testable, repeatable, and falsifiable experimentation to draw such a conclusion. Now, in the context of something like physics or chemistry, this is pretty easy. If we discover a property of something, we should be able to continue to demonstrate that this property is valid through repeated observation and experimentation. Pure water should always freeze at 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. Gravity should always result in something we drop to the floor falling in a straight line downwards within a predictable amount of time. The color spectrum of a rainbow should always start from the outside with red, then orange, then yellow, then green, then blue, then indigo, and then violet. These are all scientific facts that can be observed to be true, repeatedly demonstrated, tested against alternate theories, and if they're not true, they can be falsified with alternative evidence. The biggest drawback of empiricism, however, is that things that cannot be tested also cannot be accepted as scientifically true without some hand waving. These ideas wind up being speculative, theoretical, or axiomatic, all of which are classifications of concepts that can't be tested but which are important to our understanding. Now, I'm not going to tell you that one or the other of these methods is better or right. I hope at this point in your education you're smart enough to realize that science needs to consist of both historical and experimental methods in order to function, and that whatever divisions are in the scientific fields between these two philosophies, the best scientists make use of both. What I am going to tell you, however, is that marketing research tends to be an offshoot from the social sciences, which are in turn derived from a style of science called positivism that combines the two styles of scientific inquiry to some degree. Positivism is based on the idea that any scientific truth can be deduced from the evidence around us and it does not derive from a supernatural source. It splits methods into experimental and non-experimental categories, and then further breaks non-experimental methods down into three further categories: statistical methods, comparative methods, and case study methods. Now, think about how you've learned about marketing research up to this point, and it actually all kind of starts to make sense, right? Causal research is experimental. Descriptive research is statistical, and exploratory research is comparative and involves case studies. In the positivist philosophy, experiments are preferable, but they can be hard to employ in many scientific fields because of practical and ethical issues involving research, particularly with living creatures. Statistics are the next best approach because they allow for generalizations and inferences regarding populations that can describe and predict behavior. But comparative methods and case studies can also be used to develop a contextual understanding of a field of study and to test or refine theories that come from some of those other methods. All of these approaches towards data collection and analysis have a place within the scientific method, and while there's a hierarchy to them, all of them are needed to provide a well-rounded perspective on any field of scientific study. One of the hallmarks of positivism is the idea of having hypotheses to test, and over time, that's evolved into a very conventional approach where good science often means comparing a null hypothesis against one or more alternative hypotheses. But we've really been speaking in the abstract up to this point, and one of the things I found is that when we get too abstract, it's time to break things up with a good story. And in our next lecture, we're going to explore one of the biggest questions science has ever had to tackle: our place in the universe.